So up to this point, we've just been using the default Bootstrap CSS. This means the same colors, font sizes, shadows, border radius, and the list goes on. And this can be a problem if you don't want all your websites or applications to look very similar. Now, there's some sites that you go to and you just know right off the bat that they use Bootstrap. If you see that primary blue, then you know it's Bootstrap. So I'm going to show you how to customize your layouts, and we're going to do that with a technology called Sass. Now, I want to stress that you don't really need to know much Sass to use it for what we're doing. We're basically just taking the Bootstrap Sass files that are already created, the source code, and we're changing some variables to customize it, such as colors, shadows, all that stuff I mentioned, and then we recompile it into a new bootstrap.css file that we can then include in our HTML. All right, so even though you don't need to know most of the Sass features, I still want to just quickly go over it and go over what it offers. I do have a crash course on my YouTube channel, and it's something that's pretty easy to learn because there's not that much to it. It's not like learning a new programming language. But just to kind of go over it, so Sass is what we call a CSS preprocessor, and it adds extra features to CSS. And I'll go over those features in a minute. But I just want to mention that Sass files usually have a .scss extension. They can also have a .sass extension, but SCSS is more common. That's what we'll be using. Sass files need to be compiled to regular CSS, and there's many ways to do that. I'm going to go over some of the different ways in a minute. We can edit Bootstrap Sass variables and then compile our own version of Bootstrap CSS, which I've already mentioned. All right, now as far as some of the features, so with Sass you can create variables, and I know with native CSS we now have custom properties, but Sass variables are much more simple. We don't have to use that var syntax or the hyphens or any of that. We just simply use a money sign and then the name of the variable. And with the Bootstrap Sass files, there's a file called variables.scss that has all the Bootstrap variables that we can edit. And we don't edit that file. What we do is we overwrite the files with our own Sass, and we'll get into that. You can also nest styles. So basically you can have, a header style, and then inside of the curly braces in your CSS, you could put an H1 and then curly braces, and that would be just the H1 in the header. All right, and you can nest multiple levels deep. And then there's mix-ins, which allow you to define reusable sets of CSS declarations. So they're similar to functions, and they can also take in parameters. There's imports. So Sass provides the @import syntax that splits your style sheets into smaller chunks, and this allows us to include the Bootstrap Sass files into our own Sass files. And it's different than the standard CSS imports because with those, the server is actually making multiple calls to get each CSS file. With Sass, it just includes the imported files and makes one large CSS file. So inheritance, we have an extend directive that will allow you to share styles from one selector to the other. There's operators, mathematical operators such as plus, minus, divide, multiply, and you can use those to perform calculations on CSS values. And then there's even conditional statements like if, else, and these allow you to apply different styles based on specific conditions. So it makes CSS more like a programming language. And then it's also very modular and reusable. So with Sass, you can break your style sheets into smaller modular parts, which is what Bootstrap does. You'll see that each element, like buttons, cards, etc., they all have their own Sass file in the Bootstrap source code. Now, to compile Sass, there's a lot of different ways you can do that. So you could use a task manager like Gulp or Grunt, but that's getting more into JavaScript. Sass packages are command line tools. That's what we'll be using. So there's an NPM package, and I'll talk about NPM in a little bit, called Sass, and we're going to be using that to basically watch a folder called SCSS, and then any Sass files we create in there will automatically be compiled to regular CSS. All right, you can also use desktop applications like Koala. I haven't used any of these in a long time. I'm not sure if Koala's even around still, but these basically do the same thing. They're just done through a desktop app. And then IDEs and editors have extensions. For example, Live Sass Compiler is a VS Code extension that will compile Sass, although I think it's deprecated now. But there's others as well. And then you can also use build tools like Webpack and Parcel. And when you're getting really JavaScript heavy, then that's something to look at. But for what we're doing, using Bootstrap to just build like simple websites, there's no reason to have Webpack or anything like that. All right, so hopefully that gives you a good idea of what Sass is. In the next video, we're going to talk more about NPM, the Node Package Manager, because that's what we're going to be using to set up our environment. And then we'll move to install the Sass package. All right, guys, so now that you know what Sass is, I want to spend a couple videos setting up our starter template. And this is the final version. I just called it BS5 Simple Starter. And this is the link to it. If you already know about NPM and Sass and you know about package.json and all this stuff, then you could skip this and just move to the projects and clone this or download it, whatever. You guys know what to do. If not, then I'd suggest you follow along with the next few videos to get this set up so you know exactly how it works. All right, so before we move on to anything, I want to just talk a little bit about NPM for those of you that may have never used it or maybe have never heard of it. So NPM is the Node Package Manager, and it's a tool to install packages via the command line. And when I say packages, it could be anything from a framework to a library to a very simple tool that just helps you with something. There's over 1.5 million packages when it comes to npm.js, which is the main repository that NPM uses. Now, you do have to have Node.js installed, and if you don't know what Node.js is, it's a JavaScript runtime, meaning that it can run JavaScript on your machine or on the server without a browser, because traditionally we could only use JavaScript in the browser, but now it's much more powerful. You can do a lot more with it. So, and we're not creating a Node.js application or anything like that. We're just using NPM to create our environment. Now, when you use NPM, all your packages, which are your dependencies, are listed in a package.json file. So that's the first step. When we jump into our text editors, we want to create that package.json file, which is just a manifest with all your application or all your project info and all the dependencies. And when you want to install something such as Sass or Bootstrap, you can just run npm install and then whatever that package name is. All right, so that's kind of the gist of NPM. So like I said, you do have to have Node.js installed. So if you don't, just go to nodejs.org and go ahead and download it, install it. It's cross-platform, very easy to install. All right, so now let's create our folder for our starter project, or template, whatever you want to call this. Boilerplate is a good word for it. I'm just going to call it BS5-simple-starter. And I'm calling it simple because it really is. When you look at tooling for larger applications, you're usually using something like Webpack or Vite or something like that. We're not doing anything JavaScript heavy, so we're not using any tools like that. We're basically just compiling Sass, and that's pretty much it. So I'm going to open this up with VS Code, and I'm going to be using the terminal. So you can either open your standard terminal, or if you're using VS Code, you can go to terminal in your menu and then new terminal, or you can hit Command or Control tilde, and that will toggle the integrated terminal. So like I said, we want to create a package.json file. So to do that, we can run the command npm init. And if npm isn't working, if it's saying it can't find that command or something like that, just make sure you install Node.js. So this is going to ask us some questions. We can just hit enter for the default. So I'm going to choose for the package name, the default version, that's fine. Description, I'll just say starter template for Bootstrap websites. And then entry point, that doesn't really matter for us. Keywords, feel free to put your own name here. And then license, I'll just put MIT. So is this okay? I'll hit enter. and that creates a package.json, as you can see up here. Now, quick tip, if you don't want to answer those questions and you want to just choose the default, you can do npm init-y, and that -y flag will skip all those questions. So in the package.json, to start with, we just have like the name, version, description. We have scripts, which I'm going to get to soon because we are going to create some what are called npm scripts, but just some basic info. Now, to install something, we can do npm install, and I want to install the Sass package first and set that up. So I'm going to say npm install Sass. And what's going to happen is it doesn't install it like globally on your machine somewhere. It installs it in your local environment in this node modules folder that was just created. And there's a bunch of stuff in there, including Sass, because in addition to the Sass package, we have all of its dependencies in here as well. And then we have dependencies of dependencies. So this node modules folder gets really large. Now, you don't want to, if you're going to push this to GitHub, which we're going to do later on, we're actually going to deploy some of these websites. So we are going to push it to GitHub. And you don't want to push this node modules folder, because when someone clones your repository and it has a package.json, all your dependencies are listed in here. You can see now Sass is listed in here. So all I have to do, even you guys don't have to do this, but I'm going to delete that node modules folder. And if someone were to get my code from GitHub and they want to use it, they can just say npm install with nothing else, and it will look in the package.json and it will recreate the node modules folder. So you don't want this going to GitHub. So the way you can avoid that is by creating a file called .gitignore. Okay, make sure you put the dot in front of it. And then anything you put in here is not going to get pushed to GitHub. So we're going to put in here node_modules and save, and that's it. Okay, so when we push to GitHub, that won't get pushed because you don't want all this stuff going there when it doesn't have to. All right, so now the next step that I want to take is to compile our Sass. So let's create a folder for our Sass files. We're going to call it SCSS, because that's the extension that Sass files have. In VS Code, you can see it actually gives us the little Sass icon. Now in here, I'm going to create a styles.scss file, and this is going to be where all of our custom styling goes. And just for now, let's put a Sass variable in here. I'm going to just say primary, and I'm going to set it to $333, so a dark gray. And then we'll have our body, and let's say background color, we'll set that to the primary variable. Now this is not valid CSS, you guys know that, but it is valid Sass. However, we can't just include styles.scss in our index.html. The browser doesn't read these files. So again, we have to compile it to regular CSS. Now we already installed the Sass package, but right now we don't have a way to really run it. We can't just say, for instance, Sass build, because it's not installed globally, it's in our local environment. So that's where npm scripts come in. So if we go to our package.json, we can go to the scripts here, and we don't need this test one, so we can just replace this. And you can call this whatever you want. I'm going to say Sass:build, and then what I want that to do is run Sass, and then it's going to take in two things. First is the input folder, which is the folder that contains our Sass, which is SCSS, and then we can do colon, and then whatever we want our output folder to be, which would be the regular CSS, and I want that to be called CSS. So this folder right here, SCSS, is the input, and when it's compiled and output, it'll be put in a folder called CSS, and we don't even have to create it. It'll get created on its own. All right, so I'm going to save that. Now we already have a file in our SCSS, so let's come down here and let's run that script. Now the way you run npm scripts is just npm run, and then whatever the script is, in our case Sass build. So let's say Sass:build. Let's run that. And now notice up here a CSS folder was created. If I look in that, we have a style.css file, and if I look in that, we have valid CSS. So it looked at our Sass, it saw that we had a variable, we have the variable here, it compiled it into regular CSS. Now in addition to that, it also created this source map, so you can use this to kind of debug your Sass, but I don't really like to use these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to completely delete the CSS folder, so you guys can do that too, because you can always just run the command again. Your CSS folder isn't really important because you can always recreate it. And you're not going to edit anything in that folder. You're always going to edit your Sass. Now in the package.json, I'm just going to add a flag to this. So say dash dash no dash source dash maps. Just maps, sorry, it's not plural. All right, so now if I run the build command again, it then creates our CSS folder and then just the style CSS, there's no source map. All right, so that's how we can compile. It's very, very simple. Now we have this CSS file, so we want that to be included in our HTML, which we don't have yet. So let's create a file called index.html in the root. And we'll just create a boilerplate here. And for the title, I'm just going to say Bootstrap 5 starter. And then I'm going to include in a link tag, I'm going to include CSS/style.css. So you see how that works? We add our Sass to this SCSS folder, we build our Sass into CSS, and we include that in our HTML. And then for now, I'll just put in H1, and same thing, we'll say Bootstrap 5 starter. All right, so now I can open this up with Live Server. And you can see we have the dark background because of this right here. Now, if I change this, so if I change this to red, right, and I save, notice that it doesn't update. That's because I have to compile this again. So I have to run the build command again. Once it does that, then it gets put into the CSS. Now that's kind of a pain, right? You don't want to keep running the build command after every change you make. So that's where we bring in the watch command. So in our package.json, in addition to this Sass build, I'm actually just going to copy this down. And instead of Sass build, I'm going to call it Sass watch. And the only thing I'm going to change is I'm going to add the flag of -- watch onto this. And what that'll do is it'll constantly watch our Sass files and make the change and compile every time we edit our Sass file. So let's go down here and run npm run sass:watch. And now you can see Sass is watching for changes. So now if I go into my Sass and I change this back to, let's say, $333, as soon as I save, you can see it compiles and then it reloads in the browser. So that's going to be our workflow, is running npm run Sass watch and then opening our HTML with Live Server. And then anything we change in the Sass is going to automatically update here. Okay, if I put color in here, and I could even do like, I could create a variable like text-color and set that to white. I'm not gonna keep this here. This is just for example. And then we could say text color. I save that, look over here, and now our text is white. So the Sass compilation is done. Okay, that's all set. So I'm just going to delete everything in the styles SCSS and close that up. And then to stop this from watching, you just do Control or Command C, and that'll stop it from watching. All right, so now that we have Sass set up, in the next video, we're going to install Bootstrap, and we can actually install Bootstrap with NPM and set it up that way. All right, so we're going to start to get Bootstrap set up. One thing I wanted to do, though, is have a custom JavaScript file for anything where we need to add custom JavaScript. So in the root of our project, let's just create a folder called JS, and we'll also have the Bootstrap JS bundle in here as well. But let's create a file just called script.js. Technically, you could call it anything you want, but I like to call it scripts. So right above the ending body tag, we're going to add script with a source attribute, and that's going to point to JS/script.js. All right, so just wanted to add that first. Now, to set up Bootstrap, we're going to come down to the terminal here, and we're going to say npm install, or I for short, you can use I, and then Bootstrap. And if we look in our package.json, you should see Bootstrap as a dependency. So if we go to our node modules folder, I just want to show you this, and we look in the Bootstrap folder, you'll see that there's an SCSS folder, and this is all the Bootstrap Sass files. And look at how many there are. There's basically one for every part or every component of Bootstrap. So for instance, the nav bar has its own Sass file, right? The modals, everything, whoops, what did I do? Everything has its own Sass file. Now the one file that I want to show you in here is the variables. So this has tons and tons of variables. If I just scroll down here, you can see just how many there are. So this is how we can customize Bootstrap, is we can not edit this file. You definitely don't want to do that, because if you update Bootstrap, if you install it again, it's going to overwrite everything here with the default variables file. So what we can do is just overwrite them in our own Sass. All right, so every project we have will be adding some custom variables. And you can see all the different colors, so they have different shades of, you know, red, orange, yellow, green, etc. And I think the most common thing you want to update is like the primary, the success. Let me just see if I can find it here. There's so much stuff here. You need to search a lot when you're trying to look at what you want to change. So I want the prime right here. So they have variables for all the colors, but then there's variables for the context. So this primary color right here, if I set this to red, then anything I use like BTN primary, BG primary, text primary, it's all going to be red instead of the default Bootstrap blue. And that's how you can make your themes look unique and not too bootstrappy. But again, you don't want to change this file. I'll show you how to create your own Sass file and bring Bootstrap into it. So that's what we're going to do. Let's go to our SCSS and let's create a new file. You could import Bootstrap into the styles SCSS, but I like to keep that separate for custom styles. So let's create a file called bootstrap.scss. And then all we have to do is add an import here. So we can say @import, and we want to go into, so up one level into the node modules folder, and then into Bootstrap, and then into SCSS, and then the main Bootstrap file, which is just Bootstrap SCSS. So now we're importing that into this Sass file, and when it gets compiled, you'll see a Bootstrap CSS appear in our CSS folder. So let's do that. Let's come down here and let's just run the build command. So npm run sass build. And what it did is it looked in our SCSS folder for any SCSS files, including the Bootstrap. And if we take a look at our Bootstrap CSS, it's the entire Bootstrap CSS file. Now there's no customizations because we didn't change anything, but we can add any variables we want right here up above this import. You don't want to put it below because it won't read the variables. But before we do that, let's just make sure we include the Bootstrap CSS into our index.html. So we're going to add a link here to css/bootstrap CSS. Okay, and I'm just going to make this a little smaller so we can see these at the same time. And you'll see it actually already changed the font. So Bootstrap is being included. If I comment this out, then Bootstrap isn't being included. All right, now I'm going to, just for an example, create a button. So let's say button, and let's do btn-primary, and we'll just say submit. Whoops, I forgot the BTN. Okay, so, you know, the standard Bootstrap primary blue. So if I want to change that color now, all I have to do is go above this import, and we saw that there was a variable called primary in the variables file. So now I'm going to set that to red. I'm going to save it and then recompile. And there we go. So now it's red. So now anything I do primary will be red. In fact, I'm just going to paste in some HTML, and you can put this in if you want, but it's just the default markup that I have in the starter template. So it just says what it is. And notice I have a class of text primary and it's red. Okay, now if I change that to, let's say, purple, and then I recompile, or I could be watching it, but I'm not, so I'm just going to run the build, and now it's purple. So whatever you make that primary is what it will be. Just remember, it has to be compiled. So again, if you want to go into node modules and then bootstrap, SCSS, and then variables, you can see all the stuff you can change. If you want to look at, like, let's say radiuses, whoops, wrong search. Let's say radius, and this 87. So border radius, like you could change this to something else. And also for the small, large, extra large, shadows, and you'll see as we go along, there'll be different things that I'm going to change in within the variables. Now the last thing we need to do here is include the Bootstrap JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is, and there's a lot of ways you could do this, but I'm going to go into Node Modules and Bootstrap, and then in the dist folder there's a JS, and then I'm going to grab the bootstrap bundle.min.js, and let's just copy that, and then I'm going to close Node Modules and go into my JS folder, and I'm going to paste that in. Okay, so that's all the JavaScript for Bootstrap, and then we just need to include that in our HTML. So let's go down right above our script tag, and let's say script source and JS slash, and then our Bootstrap bundle. Okay, just look at the console here, make sure there's no errors, and now we should be all set. And the last thing I want to do in the next video is get Font Awesome set up, and we're going to do that by installing it with npm. Okay, so we're just about there with our Bootstrap 5 starter template or boilerplate. I just want to install Font Awesome. Now you could just go to your index.html and add the CDN. So if you want to do that, you certainly can, but I do want to show you how you can install it with npm and set it up that way. So I'm going to clear this up, and in the terminal, let's say npm install or I, and the package for Font Awesome for the free version is going to be @FortAwesome. Okay, so make sure you do @FortAwesome slash and then Font Awesome dash free. So that's the package name that you want. So let's go ahead and run that, and that should get added to your package.json. So we have our 3 dependencies here, and we're going to do something very similar to what we did with Bootstrap. We're going to create a new SCSS file. So I'll call it Font Awesome.scss. And I mean, technically you could put all these imports in one SCSS file and have it compile to one really big CSS file, but I like to have them separate because they do totally different things. Now there's going to be 3 lines that you're going to put in here. I'm going to paste them in, but you can just copy them, or you can get them from the repository or whatever. So there's 3 SCSS files we want to bring in from Font Awesome in our Node Modules folder that we just installed. So first is going to be Font Awesome SCSS, then we have brands.scss and solid.scss. So what's going to happen when I save this and we build our Sass is it's going to look at that file, it's going to compile it to regular CSS. So let's go ahead and run npm run sass :build. Close these up. And then you can see it created a Font Awesome CSS file that now we can include in our index.html file. So I'm going to put this right above the Bootstrap. So CSS slash Font Awesome CSS. Now one last thing we need to do before we can use it is we need the actual fonts, the web fonts. And we're going to put those in our root folder. So if you go into Node Modules, Font Awesome free, right here. So this web fonts folder, this has the actual fonts. So what I'm going to do is copy that, and then in the root, I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. and now we should be able to use Font Awesome. So I'm going to go down to the H1 here and just put these on a separate line. And in the H1, I'm going to put an I tag with FAS and then FA-star. I'm going to use the star icon. Just put a space after it. If I save, now you can see it showing the star icon. And it's red because it's within this text primary class. But now I can use Font Awesome in my workflow here. So the way we're going to do this is in the beginning of every project, in the next 5 website projects, you'll have a starter, which is going to be this, but it might just include some extra images or extra assets, favicon, things like that. But essentially, it's going to work the same exact way. And what you're going to do is just simply run npm run sass:watch. And then you're going to open your HTML with live server, which it already is, and then we're going to go from there. We can start adding Bootstrap classes. We can add custom CSS in our styles SCSS. Just remember, you're never going to edit your CSS files. You want to stay within here, okay? And that's pretty much it. All right, so I will see you in the first website project.